Agatha lived in a small rural village along with her parents and elder brother John. Life became difficult. Her own family turned into bad suffering each day to locate sufficient food and money to live to tell the tale. Her father did low-paying jobs fixing damaged fences and wearing heavy sacks at the marketplace. Her mom bought greens, sitting under the solar all day hoping to earn sufficient to buy dinner. John attempted to discover paintings, but people failed to lease him due to the fact he had not anything, that they had seen worse days. Once they had no home, that they had once been thrown out in their residence due to the fact they could not pay lease for months. They lived at the streets, drowsing in an old abandoned shed while it rained. They had nowhere to disguise, but through the whole thing her mother and father never gave up on schooling. Cash comes and goes, her father always said. However, no one can take understanding far from you. Even when they'd no meals, no shoes, no proper garments, her parents made sure Agatha and John went to high school. Agatha was a vibrant student. She studied difficult even if her stomach became empty. She refused to allow poverty stop her in the future. Her difficult work paid off. She received a scholarship to examine it, changed into her most effective threat. To exchange her existence, she left the village and went to college. After years of studying, Agatha in the end graduated. She was happy with herself, proud that she had made it. Regardless of all the struggles, she determined work as a cashier in a small agency. It wasn't plenty, however, it became better than nothing. She ought to now send someone cash home, help her mother and father, and perhaps eventually begin a brand new lifestyles. She idea matters would be extraordinary now. She notioned she had left her past at the back of, however, her heritage accompanied her. She turned into a young girl equipped to settle down and begin a family. She dreamed of love, of a husband and kids, of a home crammed with warmth and happiness. In the beginning, guys showed interest in her. They smiled at her, requested her out, made her experience special. However, then the questions could come in, which is your own family from? And when she spoke back, the whole lot changed. They pulled away. No person desired to marry a female who had been homeless. No one desired to construct a destiny with someone who had nothing. It hurt every time it harmed. She informed herself it did not remember. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. But, deep down it weighed on her. She turned into wasn't the simplest one suffering. Her brother John faced the equal pain every time he tried to stalk a female. He become rejected. Humans whispered approximately their past, approximately how their own family had not anything. No girl desired to battle with him. She saw how it broke him, and that broke her even extra. They had worked so difficult. However, regardless of what they did, things did not seem to pains. One night time Agatha's mom got here domestic, preserving a brown envelope. Her father accompanied behind his face. Extreme. Agatha, come in, or her mother said, we want to talk. Agatha sat at the small timber desk as her father positioned the letter in front of her. She looked at it, careworn. Her father cleared his throat. A wealthy guy desires to marry you? Agatha's heart skipped a beat. What? Her mother nodded. His call is Mr. David. He's the richest man from our village. Agatha frowned. Same? Mr. David? Her father sighed. Sure, the call is quite famous, but human beings have not visible him a whole lot. He left the village a long term in the past and now lives in city. They are saying he owns land, farms, and several businesses within the town. Agatha picked up the letter with shaking hands and commenced analyzing the phrases, blurred earlier than her eyes. I'm 60 years vintage, I'm a man of method, I can contend with your daughter and your circle of relatives. This marriage will carry her comfort and security. Her chest tightened. 60 years old. Her mom's voice changed into soft. He wants to marry you, Agatha. He says he'll take care of you and us. Silence filled the room. Agatha didn't recognize what to say. Simply, then there was a knock at the door. Her father stood up and opened it. Guys stood out of doors sporting sacks of maize, rice, and flour behind them. Every other man held a basket of veggies and bottles of cooking oil. Who dispatched this? Her father asked. His voice shaking. The tallest man smiled. Mr. David, he says. This is only a small present. There might be extra when he involves. See, your daughter? Agatha watched as her mother protected her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Her father nodded slowly. Thanks. The guys positioned the food internal and left Agatha regarded on the sacks, the rice, the oil, sufficient food to closing them for weeks. Her father turned to her. Agatha, this man can trade our lives. Her mom wiped her tears. Just consider it. My toddler, Agatha felt her chest tighten, become this, her simplest manner out. Few days later, Agatha sat on her mattress staring at the flickering flame of the small lantern beside her. Tears crammed her eyes. However, she refused to let them fall. This wasn't the lifestyle she desired. She'd become most effective, 23 years antique. She had desires. She wanted to fall in love, marry a person who made her heart glad, construct a destiny full of pleasure. However, now those desires seemed impossible. Mr. David was 60 years vintage, too vintage for her. She checked out the letter again, analyzing the phrases time and again, hoping they would trade. However, they failed. The truth remained, the identical. She became being requested to marry a man vintage enough to be her father. Her chest ached. She wanted to say no. She desired to run, however. Then she conceived approximately her circle of relatives. She had seen the pain in her mom's eyes whilst the once sacks of meals arrived. It became the first time in a long while that her mom knew they would not sleep hungry. She had visible the tiredness on her father's face, the manner he sat in silence, too susceptible to talk once in a while. And then she remembered the medical report she had observed it a few days in the past while cleansing the residence. It had been tucked among old papers in a wood field. She had opened it out of curiosity, simplest to sense her global shatter. Her father changed into sick. The file said he needed surgical treatment, a surgical operation that priced more cash than they had ever seen of their lives. He hadn't instructed her, none of them had. They didn't need her to worry, however. Now she knew, and she or he couldn't she concept about her brother John, about how hard he attempted, what number of times he'd become turned away just due to the fact he turned into terrible. He wanted a higher life too. However, the sector did not care. She wiped her face and took a deep breath. If this become what it took to shop her family, if this become the price she had to pay for her father to live, for her mother to prevent demanding for her brother to have a chance, then she might do it. She walked to the small desk where her parents sat. Their hopeful eyes watched her ready. She swallowed tough, then whispered, "If it method to sacrifice myself for my family, then I can do it." Her mother burst into tears. Her father closed his eyes and exhaled deeply. It changed into carried out. She had made her desire. The day had come. Agatha sat quietly on a timber stool, her fingers resting on her lap, her heart pounding. Mr. David was coming. Her mom had made her wear her fine get-dressed easy blue robe that were worn too often, however, become nonetheless presentable. Her hair become smartly tied back, and her face was sparkling with most effective a hint of oil to maintain her skin from looking dry. Her father sat beside her, his hands folded, his face unreadable. John stood close to the door, hands crossed, watching the avenue. Then they noticed it, a black automobile coming down the dusty village direction. Agatha swallowed difficult. This turned into real. Now the auto stopped in front, in their residence, and the door opened. A man stepped out. Mr. David. He changed into antique and wrinkled simply as she had imagined. His hair turned into completely gray, his again slightly bent and his steps gradual, but his face become calm. And when he smiled there has been warm temperature in his eyes. Agatha felt her breath hitch. She had feared he would be cruel, smug, or unkind. However, now searching at him, he didn't appear like a awful individual. He greeted her mother and father first, shaking her father's hand with appreciate. Then he grew to become to her. "So you are Agatha," he said, his voice deep, however, gentle. She nodded, not able to find her phrases. He chuckled softly. "I have heard lots about you, a strong, smart, younger lady." She glanced at her mother and father, uncertain a way to respond. "Come, sit with me," he said, pointing to a bench outdoor. Her legs felt weak as she walked over and sat beside him. She should feel all and sundry's eyes on them, however, for a second. She centered only on him. They talked. She had anticipated awkward silence. However, he spoke with know-how in a carefree way, much like they had been pals. He requested about her lifestyles, her desires, her circle of relatives, and while she spoke he listened. He did not rush her. He failed to communicate down to her, or call for appreciate. Instead, he smiled and stated, "You are a bright younger girl, I recognize." That she had feared this meeting, but now sitting beside him she did not feel as scared anymore. Yes, he became vintage, however. At least he was kind and he handled her nicely, and maybe simply, perhaps this would not be as horrible as she had imagined. The days passed speedy earlier than Agatha could fully accept what changed into taking place. The wedding had been organized. Her mother and a few village ladies helped her prepare. They sewed a simple white, get dressed, no longer fancy but beautiful in its own way. They braided her hair well and rubbed a little oil on her skin to make her glow. Humans whispered, a few with pleasure, others with pity. A younger female marrying a person that old, she had no desire. It is for her own family. Agatha heard them. However, she remained silent. She had already made up her mind the morning of the marriage. She stood in front of a small replique staring at her mirrored image. She gave the look of a bride, but she did now not experience like one. Her palms trembled as she adjusted her veil. Her mother came in and placed a mild hand on her shoulder. "My child," she whispered, "this is your lifestyles now. Be sturdy, be an awesome wife, and bear in mind, no matter what you are, still my daughter." Tears stuffed Agatha's eyes. She nodded. Then it changed into time. The rite changed into easy but grand in its own way. People gathered to look at, some curious, a few satisfied, a few simply there for the meals. Mr. David stood at the front wearing a nicely tailor-made suit. His eyes had been heat, his smile soft. He was antique, sure. However, at that second he did no longer look frightening. Agatha walked in the direction of him, her steps slow, her heart heavy. She desired to run, she wanted to scream, but she did not. She stood beside him, her arms bloodless, as he lightly took them in his very own. The vows had been spoken. "Do you, Agatha, take Mr. David to be your husband?" Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I do." Tears slipped down her cheeks, however. She did now not wipe them away. She looked at Mr. David. He became no longer the person she had dreamed of marrying, however. She promised herself if she became going to do that, she could do it well. She might be trustworthy to him. She might cope with him to the satisfactory of her potential. The ceremony ended. The human beings cheered, and just like that, Agatha changed into now a wife. The adventure to the metropolis changed into long and quiet. Agatha sat beside Mr. David in his costly car, staring out of the window, because the dusty village road slowly turned into easy wide streets. The lighting, the noise, the busy humans, it became a unique international. Her coronary heart pounded as the auto stopped in the front of a massive house. The gates opened and they drove in. The house turned into grand and delightful, bigger than anything she had ever imagined. The whole thing appeared new. Bright, highly priced servants rushed to hold their luggage inside. This changed into her domestic. Now Agatha accompanied Mr. David into the house, feeling small and out of area. The rooms were large, the flooring so easy that they contemplated the mild above. She had by no means lived in such comfort earlier than, however, as a substitute of happiness, all she felt turned into fear. The wedding ceremony had felt like a dream, but this was real now, and tonight she became anticipated to share a mattress along with her husband. Her heart raced. She had by no means been with a person before. Mr. David observed her discomfort. He turned to her and smiled gently. "Agatha, I know that is new for you," he said softly. "You must be afraid. Experience, lose. This is your property now." She nodded, but her palms had been still trembling after a while. She excused herself and went to the bedroom. It was massive, with a soft white bed, a golden reflect, and curtains that flowed like water. She sat on the threshold of the bed, looking at the floor, her heart beating rapid. Some moments later, Mr. David entered. He walked over and positioned a warm hand on her shoulder. "I will take a bath first," he said kindly. "You could rest." She nodded once more, not able to talk. Mr. David picked up a towel and walked into the bathroom. She listened because the water started to run. Minutes surpassed, then an hour, then the water stored, jogging. Why was he taking so long? Agatha's worry, lower back, became something incorrect. She glanced on the lavatory door, her breath shallow. Must she knock? Ought to she name out his call? Her hands gripped the mattress sheet. Something didn't sense right. Agatha sat on the bed, her fingers clasped tightly together. The sound of jogging water stuffed the room. An hour handed then. She stored, glancing at the toilet door, questioning why Mr. David was taking goodbye. Her heart was uneasy. The idea of knocking, however, something held her back. What if he wished privacy? What if something turned into wrong? Her body felt heavy with exhaustion. The day had been long, the marriage, the journey, the overpowering new lifestyles. Her eyes grew worn out. She lay down slowly, telling herself she could simply relaxation for a second. But before she knew it, sleep took her. Unexpected sound woke her. Her eyes fluttered open, the toilet door creaked. She sat up fast, her heart racing. The bay turned into still, going for walks. However, the guy stepping out of the toilet changed into no longer Mr. David. Agatha, iced up, a young guy stood before her. Tall, sturdy, handsome, his hair become wet, his face clean and youthful, his body wrapped in a towel. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. She did not realize him. Her frame went bloodless with worry. Where was Mr. David? Who changed into this guy? She screamed. She stumbled, returned her arms, grabbing the bedsheets, her complete frame shaking. "Who are you?" she cried. The young man raised his hand slowly as though to calm her. "Agatha," he stated, softly. She gasped. That voice, she knew that voice. It was Mr. David's voice, but how? Agatha shook her head. This needed to be a trick, a dream, a nightmare. No, no. "This isn't actual," she whispered, her voice breaking. The younger man stepped nearer. "It is me." Agatha's whole global started out to spin. She sat, frozen, her body stiff with fear and confusion. The young man in the front of her appeared not anything like Mr. David, but his voice had become the identical. She shook her head, looking to make sense of what was going on. Then he stepped nearer. Earlier than she may want to circulate, he gently pulled her into his arms. His fingers had been heat company constant. "Agatha," he whispered. Then he kissed her. His lips were gradual, smooth and deep, filling her with an unfamiliar warm temperature. Her heart pounded for a moment only. For a second she forgot the entirety. The room disappeared. The concern melted. All that remained turned into the kiss. But then truth got here, crashing. Again? No. She'd driven him away, her breath choppy, her body shaking. She stumbled backward, gripping the brink of the mattress for support. "Where is my husband?" she cried, tears filling her eyes. The young guy sighed. "Agatha, pay attention to me." "No," she screamed, "I do not know you." "In which is my husband? In which is Mr. David?" She ran closer to the bathroom, waiting for the antique man she had married. But it turned into empty. She spun around, her chest rising and falling in panic. The younger guy progressed again. "I am your husband." Agatha shook her head violently. "No, no, this is a lie." She fell to her knees, sobbing. The young man knelt beside her. He didn't contact her this time. He certainly spoke. "Agatha, I recognize that is tough to agree with, however. I'm Mr. David." "I've continually been Mr. David." She lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. "How?" He took a deep breath. "I take advantage of unique makeup to look antique." Her eyes widened. "Why?" she whispered. He checked out her, his expression gentle. "However, severe, because I needed to recognize who you honestly were." Agatha swallowed tough. "My grandfather as soon as instructed me, an excellent girl is now not discovered with cash but with knowledge. I have wealth, Agatha, greater than the general public can consider. However, I did no longer want a wife who most affected desired my cash. I desired a lady with a type coronary heart, a strong spirit, and a love. This is real." He paused. "I had heard approximately your struggles, your kindness, your sacrifices to your circle of relatives. I desired to see if it became actual, or if you, like many others, would marry for riches. By myself." Agatha's heart pounded. The entirety changed into spinning. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't care how you look," she stated, her voice trembling. "I simply want my husband." "Lower back." She stood up, her body shaking. "He can be antique, he can be wrinkled, however, he is kind, and I've already promised to take care of him." Her arms clenched into fists. "I will no longer be fooled through appearances." The younger man sighed, his eyes filled with something Agatha should no longer recognize. "Agatha," he said softly, "do you recall an antique guy you once helped?" She frowned, pressured. "What? When you had been a cashier in the metropolis?" He continued. "There was an antique guy who came to your store one night. He became tired, vulnerable, and suffering. To pay for his food, announcing his pockets become stolen. You paid for him and helped him to a seat." Agatha's heart skipped a beat. She did remember it. Become a cold, rainy evening, and Vintage Man had walked in searching, exhausted. He had counted his coins with shaking fingers, figuring out he did not have sufficient cash. She had seen the ache and embarrassment in his eyes without wondering. She had paid for his meals. She had even brought him heat tea, and sat with him till he felt better. It became a small act of kindness. She had no longer thought a good deal of it now. This stranger became bringing it up. Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. The young guy smiled. Sadly, that vintage guy turned into my grandfather. Agatha froze. He in no way forgot what you probably did for him that day. He persevered. He instructed me that he had met an angel, a female with a pure heart. He desired to realize extra approximately. You, Agatha's breath caught in her throat. He did a background test on you, Agatha. He discovered about your struggles, your own family, and your sacrifices, and he got here to me with a request. Her lips parted, but no phrases got here out. He requested me to marry you. Agatha's mind went blank at the beginning. I refused, he admitted. I didn't agree with organized marriages. I did not need to marry someone I had by no means met. But then he swallowed, difficult. My grandfather handed away Agatha's coronary. Heart twisted, his final want before he died, become for me to marry you. Tears stuffed her eyes. I desired to honor his desire, however. I did not want to be pressured into marriage, so I got here up with a plan. I disguised myself as an old guy to test you, to look if you were in reality as kind and compassionate as my grandfather believed. Agatha sat shocked and confused. Everything she notioned she knew was shattered. What I did not assume he introduced, become to fall in love with you the moment I set eyes on you. Agatha's breath hitched. You've been not anything, however, an angel to me, he stated. Much like my grandfather said, she felt her world spinning, the whole lot made experience, the way he had listened to her, the manner he had treated her own family with kindness, after which he spoke the very last phrases that made her heart prevent the Mr. David, that the villagers know is my grandfather. He regarded into her bowled-over eyes, and whispered my name, is likewise David. Agatha sat in silence, her thoughts spinning with feelings. The whole thing she had believed, everything she conceived was actual, had modified. Mr. David, the person she had agreed to marry, became never an antique guy. He had tested her, he had watched her, he had fallen in love with her. She looked at him, the younger, handsome guy standing earlier than her may want to. She agree with him. Her coronary heart pounded as he all at once clapped his fingers. The door opened. Human beings entered. Makeup artist, watch closely, he stated softly. She did for the following couple of hours. Agatha sat nonetheless as the artists labored on his face, layer by layer, wrinkle by wrinkle. The younger man slowly disappeared, and then, before her eyes, Mr. David returned, the identical vintage wrinkled face she had come to know, the same guy she had vowed to take care of. Tears filled her eyes. She stood up, walked ahead, and touched his face. She may want to experience the makeup, the cover, but it didn't matter anymore. A sob escaped her lips. She threw her arms round him. I don't care the way you appearance, her voice broke, young or antique. I like you, David, held her tightly, and I love you, Agatha. They stood there, wrapped in every other's arms, tears of alleviation and happiness flowing freely at that second. Nothing else mattered now, not his age now, not his look, not how their tale commenced, handiest their love, and from that day ahead they lived happily ever after.